Right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Now, thanks for joining us today to launch the report, Nothing But a Pen and a Word, Voices from the Stateless Bidoon Community in Kuwait during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Rasha Saba, and I will moderate this discussion today, and I'm joined by a wonderful panelist, Amal Dishkira, the co-director of the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion, Yona Kazmova, a member of Steering Committee of Hawiyati, Tara Sipiri Far, Iran and Kuwait Senior Researcher, Middle East and North Africa Division, Human Rights Watch, and Drury Dyke, International Partnership, focal point for Salam for Democracy and Human Rights. Welcome all, and thanks for joining us today. Just few points before we start our conversation. This event is going to be broadcasted live on Salam DHR Twitter and YouTube accounts with Arabic translation too. And we will be taking questions after the panel discussion. So if you have any question, please type them in the chat box. We will start our event today by playing a short clip, I think a 4-minute clip, before we kickstart our panel discussion. So please enjoy.
Nothing but a pen and a word. Voices from the stateless Bidoon community in Kuwait during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Bidoon alphabet, the cover image sets out the Arabic alphabet evoking the style of a primary school teaching material. The artist, however, uses images of the initial letter that reflect fundamental themes of a stateless Bidoon person's reality, such as identity, prison, and take one's own life. In a simple but expressive way, from top right, moving from right to left in keeping with the text direction of Arabic. Prison bars depicted on the cover of the report are all too frequent an experience of modern Bidoon life. Members of the Bidoon community face arbitrary force and punishment if they attempt to mobilize. Most people interviewed for this report claimed they feared being imprisoned if they protested, leaving them feeling powerless within the country. As one respondent to the project survey lamented, they are shackled and have nothing but a pen and a word. This report explores the life experiences of members of Kuwait's stateless Bidoon community during the COVID-19 pandemic. From March 2020 to January 2022. It seeks to provide a qualitative snapshot of the lives of those who took part in the project by exploring whether and how their experiences could have been shaped by their socio-legal status and what the impact of that experience might have been. It derives recommendations based on the experiences shared with Salam for Democracy and the Human Rights Project team. The report is the culmination of a pilot research-based action advocacy project on Kuwait carried out as a part of an initiative entitled the COVID-19 Emergency Statelessness Fund Consortium, created by the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion in June 2020, to respond to the life-threatening marginalization with potentially disastrous consequences that stateless people faced in the context of COVID-19, as warned in the Joint Civil Society Statement in Solidarity with the Stateless, issued by 84 organizations in June 2020. Many of the concerns articulated in the joint statement were in turn documented and evidenced in the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion in 2020 Impact Report, entitled Stateless in a Global Pandemic, also published in June 2020. The project period encompassed the pre-existing and ongoing contextual and socio-political developments. The pandemic didn't occur in a vacuum, Participants told us that these factors impacted on the health and well-being of members of the stateless Bidoon during the pandemic. Kuwait is a state party to 7 legally binding international human rights treaties. While this project is not about the government of Kuwait's general adherence to international human rights standards, we consider treaty bodies' observations where they appear to have had a bearing on how the government of Kuwait has behaved towards members of stateless Bidoon community and the right to civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights during the pandemic. This includes physical and mental health outcomes as expressed by participants in this study. As a conclusion, nothing but a pen and a word, wither the stateless of Kuwait. This is a picture of the map of Kuwait. As depicted in the cover image, it represents the homeland for the stateless Kuwaitis, whom the government terms illegal residents and routinely subject to marginalization, deprivation, and exclusion. One of the core goals of this project has been to provide a voice of stateless Kuwaitis. During repeated consultations, participants spoke of being ignored and abused. Project consultations, the survey and desk research sought to access the conduct of the government of Kuwait management of the pandemic regarding the stateless Bidoon community based on independent reports and evidence. Findings relating to the conduct of the government of Kuwait toward the stateless community between 2020 and 2022.
Nothing but a pen and a word. I must say, I really found the report very, very informative, and so maybe we can start the conversation by unpacking that. And I would like to ask Drury if you can tell us more about the report, its methodology, limitations, and what are the main findings?
Thanks, Rasha. Look, the first thing I want to say is a huge thank you to the very many Bidoon stateless members of the stateless community in Kuwait who helped us a huge amount. Some of whom, at least one or two of whom are here. Others are less willing, I think, as you can imagine. Others can imagine for security reasons to make themselves known. Others are outside the country, so we could not have done it without the input of people like Ahmed Jabir bin Swaits or Ari Jashamari and others. I mean, first of all, let's start. For those who don't know, and I guess a lot of people, there's not very many people online, but for those who don't know, the government, the Kuwaiti government currently classes a population between 92 and 111,000 people, so fairly substantial number of people. They class them as illegal residents, and it's a community that, according to the research that we did, there was a survey, for example, 71% on the survey that we conducted. I'll tell you more about the survey in a short while. Basically said they're powerless. We have no voice. And that quote that you cited, Rasha, was really about that. That we have nothing. We just have a pen and a word. And that's really what we wanted to address here, was to say, well, actually, we want to give you a voice. I just want to just touch very quickly on the key findings. Kind of really, really quick. I'm sure we'll come to it later. It's all about documentation and status, all about legal status. That's what it kept coming back to over and over and over again. Everyone said the legal status defines the outcomes. And in terms, what were those outcomes in COVID-19? And indeed now, they were not having access to healthcare, not having access to education, having insecure, unreliable jobs, lowly paid, and so on. In terms of healthcare, when it was made available in the pandemic, it was often later or of less quality. And in particular, again, this kind of dovetailing this legal registration or kind of legal classification with getting a vaccination for COVID-19, there was an online form, and it said, "Oh, you need your ID number, you need your documentation number." Well, many people don't have it, so they actually couldn't get it. And we'll come to the kind of factors that touch on that. And one in particular is the central system. So there's a body that the government of Kuwait has established. It's an arm's length body, an arm's length government body. It's not part of the government formally, to administer the affairs of this community. And it's a big problem. And it's a big problem, and I'm sure we'll come back to it. Towards the end, we touch on the question. We know what can be done. What can we do? And again, coming back to the survey, 62% of the 104 people who responded, they said, "Well, look, we can't do anything, but international organizations can, and we look to you to promote our rights, to make us have a voice, kind of amplify our voice." And finally, really quickly, actually, to answer your question directly, in respect to methodology, look, we couldn't go. There was no budget to go to Kuwait. We could not do field research for this. So we had a really basic structure, of format. Number one, we built on existing research by Arija Shamari, by Bidoon, by people who are putting this stuff out there online and so on. We wanted to cover all the angles. So we set up a little WhatsApp group, WhatsApp a Signal group. They provided a kind of barometer, a sense check of where things were going. Second, two online seminars, early on and later on, to kind of get a kind of before and after, seek involvement of people, get different voices in. It was in Arabic. I mean, my Arabic is awful, but luckily people like Ahmed and others and my colleague Jawad have really helped me reach out to do that. There was a pre-meet of a CRC, so a UN treaty body, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, did it during the research time. The Committee on the Rights of the Child held a pre-sessional. We used that opportunity to further speak to Kuwaitis and Bidoon activists, Abdul Hakim Al-Fadli, for example, amongst others. Fifth of the 6 methods was a scrape of social media. You'll see in the report, people will see, we refer a lot to a particular blogger and an activist and so on. So the scrape, so-called scrape of social media, was really informative. It had to be cross-checked. It had to be, checked with other, with people, but actually it was pretty good. And finally, the very last thing at the very end, people like Amal, who's online, and Joanna, and other people who are here, was just consultation with experts. Seema Watling at Amnesty, Stephanie Huber at a UK-based asylum organization. They provided. They said, "Well, did you check this? Did you structure this?" And of course, Amal at the very end, then restructured. I just want to touch on the survey really quickly. This will be the last thing I say. Really difficult to get people to reply because of fear. In the end, we had a 29-question survey. 104 people replied, so it's really small, really small. If you think of a population of between 92,000 to 111,000, that's the kind of figures that appear realistic. The UNHCR uses the 92,000 figure. A parliamentary body used 111,000 a couple of years ago in terms of stateless. So getting 104 people to reply, it's not a great deal. But I just want to add, and this is the very, very final thing I'll say, 29% of those people were in Jahra, which is a town, a settlement, a city to the west of Kuwait City, where a lot of stateless people live. And 17%, 17%, were in Sulabia. Again, a kind of a part of greater Kuwait City, where again a lot of Kuwaiti people live. So that's a kind of snapshot of what this was all about. We'll get to the kind of recommendations and so on, and maybe we'll drill down on some of the findings. Just kind of maybe really quickly on that, maybe the very last thing I'll say is that there was no goodwill exhibited by the government of Kuwait in respect to this question. And I guess that was, as somebody who's kind of like an observer to this sort of thing, that's really galling and quite touching. So I'll leave it there. But so that's kind of a snapshot of how we went about doing this thing. Thanks, Rasha.
Thank you. Thanks, Rory. Would you like to say a bit more on the recommendations, or shall we leave it maybe?
Yeah. So we had some quite general calls, the recommendations, and actually they're quite broad and maybe quite simple. In a way, one of the top level things was government of Kuwait, just review your entire approach to the stateless question. And chief of that, and maybe this is something that Tara will come to later, was the role of the Jahaz al-Markazi, the central system. And it's an obstacle, and how it's an obstacle we'll I'm sure we'll come to. A chief of which is the kind of almost industrial scale falsification, coercive falsification of identities by this agency that, through its own actions, actively deprived Kuwaiti residents of access to healthcare, access to education, access to social support system. And then sort of, kind of in that mix was create a pathway, a reasonable pathway to citizenship. Have a pathway that was correspondent to international standards, that used objectively verifiable methodology to provide citizenship. And again, a really very broad brush one. This is not a new issue at all. UN human rights bodies, treaty bodies, and Kuwait is a state party to 7+ treaties, human rights treaties. In every single one, Convention on the Rights of the Child, civil and political rights, economic and social and cultural rights, there's always a section in which the treaty body experts say, look, how you're treating the stateless Bidoon is unacceptable. It's completely at odds, at variance with the international standards required. You need to sort this out. The bottom line is you need to sort this out. So a key recommendation is respond, deal with, in reality, those treaty body recommendations. There's, in the context of the overall project, I guess I will come to it. So this project was carried out under the umbrella of a larger project at ISI, and Amal is here with us to tell us maybe a little bit more about the kind of global application of that project. That had some kind of global learnings about the right to nationality, documentation and legal status, about institutional blind spots and consultation and engagement, or the notion of build back better, which I think is something that we've heard in many of the places where we live, that are really crucial, are quite central to this. But I think ultimately, and the thing that Bidoon said to us over and over again was address the legal status, the definition of this community now called illegal resident, when under any other objectively independent, or indeed based on objectively verifiable information, if it was any other state, they'd go, the state would go, well, actually, you've been here this amount of time, you're actually a citizen, and the underlying factors of discrimination that prevent that from happening are really shocking and really need to be addressed. But as I say, we'll come back. Well, we may come back to more of that a bit later
on. Thanks, Rory. I think the way that the report talk about the historical development or deterioration of the situation of Bidoon actually was very useful in laying out these the connection between the legal status and discrimination. Yeah, since the 70s, since 60s and 70s. As you said, the report is actually a part of a global project in collaboration with the Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion. I will turn to Amal and maybe ask how can the report be read within a global context of statelessness, let's say, and if there are any common features with some global cases.
Thank you so much, Rasha, and thank you again to Drury and Jabad and the team at Salam for undertaking this really daunting task of pulling this research together, and as Drury mentioned, in very challenging circumstances, and then delivering out of that this report, which really is very insightful and is a huge contribution to the field. I'm going to start my kind of comments perhaps in a place that you wouldn't expect me to start, and perhaps a place which is going to, cause you to hope that I just don't spend too much time there. But I'm going to talk a bit about Brexit, which is a subject that people have talked about a lot. And the reason I want to talk about Brexit is because if you look at the way in which kind of Brexit happened in the UK, it was successive governments scapegoating the EU for their own policy failures and for their own shortcomings, and basically painting the EU as the bad guy, and creating this huge boogeyman out of the EU. And it was the media also was very complicit in this. And then there's the call for the referendum. And then these very leaders who had made their careers out of being critical in an unfair way about the EU suddenly found themselves in a situation where they actually had to make the case to remain in the EU. I'm talking about David Cameron and the Remain campaign that he led. And inevitably, the argument that they made was very unconvincing. And they lost, and the rest is history. And in a way, what we see in the field of statelessness is something very similar, where you have political leaders, leaders of countries, community leaders who make their name, who make their careers, who make their wealth out of divisive politics, which scapegoats communities, which others them, which kind of puts a black mark on them and which excludes them. And then you have a situation like COVID-19 coming along, and all of a sudden these very same leaders need to be preaching from the hymn sheet of we're all in this together. And we need to protect everyone in order for everyone to be protected. And that's not convincing, because it comes in a context of years and decades of marginalization and exclusion, persecution against communities around the world. And this is something that we've seen in Kuwait, but also in other countries where there are significant stateless communities. And I think the lesson here is that we often speak about exclusion as a byproduct of statelessness. But in fact, I think we need to be flipping things around and recognizing that statelessness is a crude technology to justify, deepen, and entrench exclusion. So exclusion isn't a consequence, exclusion actually is the objective. And when exclusion is the objective, and when the technology that's used is deprivation of nationality and the perpetuation of statelessness, then you result in a situation, as in Kuwait, but also in many other countries, where you are actually attacking the very fabric of society. You're attacking the very fabric of your democracies. And the long-term consequences of that are going to be significant in most of these countries. Drury spoke about documents and how the need for documents is kind of at the heart of everything. And one of the technologies of exclusion is actually based on documents. It's based on taking documents away from people. It's based on unrealistic expectations of people to provide certain documents. It's on the arbitrary and discriminatory bureaucracies that people have to navigate in order to obtain documents. It's the requirement for certain groups of people to have to prove and reprove and re-reprove their worthiness to belong. through providing certain documents. And Ioana would be able to speak, for example, of the experience in the Dominican Republic, which again is centered on documents. I can speak about the situation in Assam, India. We can speak about what happened in Bangladesh, about the Rohingya experience in Myanmar, about the Nubian community in Kenya, where you have these technologies, these very rudimentary technologies, which are used with great effect to target and execute violence against communities. And so it is in this context that COVID-19 happened. And what emerged out of that situation, and what we observed out of that situation, was two things. One was that stateless communities who were in a position of great precarity to begin with were worse off. They were excluded from access to relief. They were excluded from any benefits. Eventually, they were excluded from access to vaccinations. They were in a worse situation. But secondly, this also provided quite a unique opportunity to shed a spotlight on the structural discrimination that underlines statelessness in ways which were not possible before, because COVID-19 created this crisis where suddenly the world at large was kind of forced to encounter its own fallibility, its own humanity, the fact that there were certain things that we took for granted that we couldn't do any longer. And these were experiences that stateless people face in the day-to-day. So out of this emergency situation, but also this opportunity to highlight and address some of the structural challenges and issues that underpin statelessness, a number of groups coordinated by my organization, we set up a COVID-19 Emergency Statelessness Fund, and we are very fortunate to get the support of a number of donor allies of ours. And as a result of this fund, we were able to work with 18 groups, most of them community-based, stateless, impacted person-led organizations, to address the structural discrimination related to COVID-19, but also related to deep underlying issues that these communities faced in countries around the world. In addition to this national work, we also engaged in international advocacy, and we also worked very closely as a consortium to share our lessons and to learn from each other and to build a sense of community. There are a number of outputs that came out of this, including an impact report, which we published last year. I will share in the chat the link to that impact report, and that will give anyone who's interested a lot more information on some of the findings in terms of the structural discrimination, both in the short-term COVID-19 implications, but also in terms of their longer-term implications. We will also be launching early next month a final output of this consortium, which kind of looks at the lessons learned and the impact of the consortium. And there are some fabulous lessons that we have learned through looking at the way this consortium of actors have worked, as Jory mentioned, on very tight budgets in very challenging situations to actually achieve some pretty significant real-world change. Now, what I would like to do is pick on maybe three kind of reflections in terms of some of the comparative common experiences that I've seen across these different projects that we've been able to implement with partners through the consortium. Now, the first that I want to point out to is that of risk, and the fact that this is really risky business. I mean, it won't. It's obvious to everyone that in this panel discussion, where ideally we would have Bidoon men and women leading the conversation, we don't have any Bidoon men and women leading the conversation, not because there aren't incredibly courageous, dedicated, impressive activists out there, but simply because the stakes are too high. And that idea of risk is something which sadly the Bidoon community shares with many other groups impacted by statelessness. We saw this through the consortium, where members had to change projects because suddenly they were in a situation where there was a coup in their country, or where their community work had kind of brought them into the focus of local gangs who started intimidating them, or where people had to actually go into safe houses because of the way in which their work was attracting the attention of authoritative governments. And this idea of risk is something which is never far away, I guess, from human rights defenders in general. But in the context of statelessness, it is exacerbated by the fact that the act of the audacity of existing as a stateless person is often criminalized. And your lack of legal status is used as a way of targeting you and of making you more precarious and your existence more precarious. And in this context of risk, again, going back to one of the findings that Drury pointed to in terms of the survey, the fact that the majority of those surveyed looked to the international community and to organizations and groups outside of Kuwait to shed a spotlight on their situation where it is too dangerous for them to do it themselves. That responsibility of standing in solidarity with and finding ways to support impacted communities and activists to be able to do their work in as safe a way as possible. It really is a challenge that those of us outside of those spaces need to take seriously. The second observation I want to kind of share with you is that it's always more than, and it's always deeper than. And what I mean by this is whenever we talk about statelessness, we talk about the cost of statelessness in terms of political exclusion, lack of documentation, denial of access to education or access to healthcare, or a whole range of things. And all of that is true. But I think when you speak to people who've lived their lives as stateless people, you realize that it's always more than that. And it's always deeper than that. Because being made stateless, being stripped of your right to nationality, is a violence that is committed against your very core as a human being. And this is something that I myself, who is not a stateless person, I can study, I can try to understand, I can empathize with, but I don't think I will ever truly feel. And it is only our friends and our partners and our colleagues who are stateless or who have experienced statelessness in the world who experience this true weight. And whenever I speak to colleagues and friends who are stateless, I often feel that they have this great burden that they're trying to articulate this. And it's difficult for those who don't have that experience to actually fully fathom what it means. And I think we need to find ways to show greater solidarity, to understand more, but also to find ways to help address that situation. I think it's similar to, this may not be the best example, but it's something that has just come to mind. In a context of bereavement, you can show your solidarity, you can empathize, but if you truly haven't been through that yourself and lost someone who's close to you, you will never understand what that other person is going through. And I think that if you look at the way in which people who have experienced the violence of statelessness talk about their experiences, talk about their relationship with the state, talk about their relationship with the term statelessness, you will find that it requires a lot more effort from those of us who are not stateless and who have not been stateless to grapple with and to understand and to reach out. Now, the third reflection I want to share is a more positive one to kind of end my intervention. And that's to talk about change and to share with you that what we have learned through the COVID Fund is that change is possible and change can happen, and change happens often in the most unexpected ways. And what we have seen is where stateless communities have had the resourcing, have had the support and partnership, have had the connections to identify the problem that they want to address and provide the solution for that they think is most suitable to them and their communities. they often can make change in the most impactful ways. Just one example from the Dominican Republic, where that was another country which was represented in the consortium, and we were looking at different ways in which to create a project in the Dominican Republic with our partners under the consortium. And we were talking about the usual things that NGOs talk about. And the community there was like, one of the main things that we had to deal with is that there's this horrible stereotype against our community that we are lazy. And another very practical thing we had to deal with is that members of our community have been excluded from state relief. So why don't we tackle both of those problems by using these funds to give some microfinance loans to small-term entrepreneurs so that they can support themselves and their families, and also demonstrate through their actions the fact that this stereotype of them being a lazy community is just utter rubbish. And that was one of the most effective activities that was implemented under the COVID-19 fund. There are many other examples that I can share, but I just want to end on the idea that change is possible. And for change to really happen, it also requires those of us working internationally and globally on these issues to change how we operate. And this is what Drury was referring to when he mentioned the roadmap for change, which is a 3-step process that we devise out of the consortium, so in collaboration with all consortium members, to challenge those in positions of power, be they UN agencies or governments or donors or NGOs that are better funded, to change the way they operate when it comes to how they deal with the statelessness issue and how they work with stateless communities. And the roadmap for change requires such entities to start by checking for institutional blind spots and ensuring that their operations kind of take into full consideration the impact of statelessness. That secondly, there's meaningful inclusion, participation, consultation of stateless communities, and importantly, accountability to stateless communities in how programs are developed and implemented. And finally, that through this process, there are much more targeted actions based on the input and feedback of stateless communities towards tangible change. So let me stop there and hand the floor back to you, Rasha. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amal. And thanks for ending on a positive note. But also, I'm also grateful for you to highlight especially the issue of the violence of statelessness and how the impact of that on stateless people, and that has many layers that we need to address and understand. But also on the point of the structural discrimination and the technology of exclusion, I guess it's I really like your use of words, and I think it's a good window to actually go back to maybe on the issue of Kuwait and Bidoon in Kuwait. And maybe my next question to you, Tara, on that. So Drury mentioned the central system. So if you can tell us more about what is its role, and what is its relevance in this situation.
Sure, and thank you for including me on this panel among the very expert on the issue of statelessness. First, I think I want to start with a word about the issue of risk that has come up over and over during our panel. I think it's important to note that under Kuwaiti law, non-Kuwaitis are barred from taking part in public gatherings, which mean and Kuwaiti authorities have been using that provision in the law to arrest and prosecute members of the Bidoon community who've taken to the streets for peaceful protest and have brought other vaguely defined national security charges against them for their peaceful mobilization. So the way Duri mentioned that even though we're not looking at the overall human rights situation in Kuwait, we're talking in the context that several provisions in national security and restrictions on freedom of speech and assembly impact the ability of the Bidoon community to advocate for their rights. And to your question about the central agency to remedy the status of illegal residence, which is its formal name, was established in 2010, and it's the latest administrative body that is in charge of addressing issues related to stateless community and the Bidoon. First and foremost, this agency is tasked, basically is in charge of issuing review cards that serves as their primary identity card for the community, and it's essential for accessing basic services in the society, anything from healthcare and education and employment to, for instance, being able to open a bank account and then being able to use your bank account. And we have had cases of people running into unexpected and sometimes unimaginable problems because of lack of access to these cards or their cards not being renewed. The general conduct of this agency that actually does not have a lot of oversight on, at best could be described as opaque, but more realistically can be described as arbitrary. There's very little transparency into the laws and procedures that govern how the agency makes decisions about the status of Bidoon, and there's virtually no judicial route available for the community to challenge that. What we have seen and heard from the community over and over is that there seems to be this coordinated pressure on the Bidoon to renounce their claim to Kuwaiti nationality or be arbitrarily assigned a second nationality. We've reviewed papers that have assigned other nationalities in the region, Iraqi, Iranian, Jordanian, to the Bidoon when they went to renew their card. Sometimes without their consent, without their knowledge, they signed paper that then resulted in them receiving a second nationality. What's important to understand in this context is that first and foremost, it's unclear how the process is being conducted, how a person is being assigned a second nationality. The government claims that this is based on research done on their part, including intelligence report, but a member of a stateless community does not have access to the file, cannot review it, has no opportunity to provide input, or so far they haven't been able to meaningfully challenge it in the court system. This also doesn't mean that the other states are going to accept the claim to nationality. We have corresponded with other embassies in the region, and they don't recognize Kuwaiti authorities' claim of second nationality. So this doesn't mean that by assigning a second nationality, there is another path open for the Bidoon to be able to resolve the issue. This is basically assigning a second nationality is rendering the community as illegal resident and keeping them in that limbo, restricting their access to the cards that are essential for their rights and services they need. Occasionally, on humanitarian basis, government might facilitate access to education for kids, healthcare on certain humanitarian basis, occasionally facilitating bank situation. But but not on a comprehensive or rights perspective. Basically, the solution that it seems like that the state has come up with is to erase the community and assign all of them a second nationality without transparency, and that is going on, and year by year, more people are facing these problems, and there's no end in sight. There's no will to deal with it from a rights perspective, and there are very little avenues, as I said, for any oversight or judicial review of these decisions. Lawyers in the community are trying to take these cases to the court. They have had, but so far they have not been able to meaningfully challenge it, because citizenship issues in Kuwaiti law are also not subjected to judicial review. So they're kind of in this limbo of being at the hands of the institution that his mandates is opaque, arbitrary, gets renewed on an ad hoc basis, and they're caught in this legal limbo situation with no political will on the side of the state to resolve it.
Thanks, Tara. It's very useful to think about it. In these terms, I think also the report shows some of the examples that you've been mentioning, like I think two brothers were siblings and they were assigned two different citizenship or nationality, I guess. I will, for the sake of time, maybe I can move to Ioana, and maybe hear from you more about like Kuwaiti as a regional focus organization. What is your role, and what what things you can help with in this situation, but also from a regional perspective, if you can draw some like understanding of similar or like examples of statelessness in the region, and how does that sit in relation to the Bidoon case in Kuwait?
Thank you so much, Rasha, and thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to represent Kuwaiti, and I apologize for my voice. I'm getting over a flu. So I will step back and introduce Kuwaiti briefly. We are a network for stateless solidarity, formed with the pandemic in 2020, and formed by a heterogeneous group of organizations. One of the founding members is Salam for Democracy and Human Rights. Rawat Hakuk in Lebanon participated, as well as individual researchers and lawyers for the human rights of stateless persons. This highlighting that most advocacy and work on statelessness in the Middle East has not been concentrated in the hands of organizational actors, but rather led by individuals and loosely formed groups, community groups. The network focuses on statelessness in a regional setting in threefold ways. So we work on the identification and understanding of cases of statelessness. Documentation is very important in a region with limited civil society organizing around the issue. We work on, secondly, fostering solidarity and collaboration among stateless persons and activists across the region, and of course, on supporting advocacy. So in that sense, our role with the cause of the Bidoon from Kuwait, whether in the country or in the diaspora, has been one to raise awareness of statelessness as one of the framings of the human rights problems that the Bidoon in Kuwait face, because it is one possible framing, of course, and to then participate in advocacy efforts supported by well-sourced research, such as the research that is being presented today. We have, over the course of the last 3 years, engaged in a variety of efforts along these lines, responding to the fact that the Kuwaiti government, despite the pandemic, did not abandon efforts to further they would put it as resolve the Bidoon situation. The Bidoon community largely saw it as eliminate or further fragment the community. So, for example, in 2020, there was a bill proposed by the then president of the parliament on resolving the Bidoon situation, which largely entailed eliminating or denying their claim to nationality and providing a very limited framework. In connection with that, Kuwait prepared, again supported by our allies from Kuwait, prepared a background note to put into context what this resolution entails and where the question comes from. We have participated in a number of media events and in events organized by Salam in relation to gender equality in nationality law in Kuwait, which is another aspect of the situation that is important, the gender focus, both in the context of COVID and in the broader context of nationality deprivation in Kuwait is crucial insofar as women, particularly Bidoon women, are forced to bear a disproportionate amount of the burden of raising families without equitable access to labor market or to education. We further participated in and issued a statement in solidarity with the hunger strike organized by Bidoon activists in 2022, which was fortunately, unfortunately did not result in significant changes on part of the government, but it put the issue back on the agenda. We have seen in recent months certain cosmetic changes, again, as Tara was mentioning, on humanitarian grounds with regard to access to health and education, but the rights-based approach is really what is lacking. And that's one thing that I would like to emphasize here, that our understanding from the engagement that we have had in the issue is that nationality is a whole of Kuwaiti society concern. It is not limited to the group of persons identifying as Bidoon or identified as Bidoon. This massive elimination of space to vindicate or claim one's right to a nationality in terms of the judicial system has been particularly striking over the course of the last year. And that is one thing that we have observed with the complete elimination of judicial review on the issue of nationality in Kuwait. This is not unique, of course. This theory of sovereign prerogative or works of sovereignty, I believe is one crude way to translate it, dominates litigation on the issue across the region, Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt being some examples that come to mind. So in light of all of this, what we would like to be able to do in terms of supporting advocacy and expressing further solidarity is to continue participating in awareness-raising campaigns, of course, and advocacy focused on capacity building, particularly when it comes to mental health. That is one issue that the pandemic and the cases of COVID may fall, but the added burden that the pandemic imposed on the continuous mental health load that statelessness imposes is one future direction that I believe that everyone working on the issue should be engaged with. We would like to continue coordinating and collaborating with regional and international NGOs. And of course, to connect individuals, and the issue of risk being, as it is highlighted by Amal and Tara, means that it is often far easier for us to engage with Bidoon who have been exiled from Kuwait. So that's one significant aspect that limits our access and ability to make an impact. That being said, speaking about nationality issues across the region, I believe, help diffuse the tension and the perceived threat on part of individual governments when it comes to the issue of nationality. We also believe that the role of a network should be to raise up and amplify the voices of people who are in the middle, in the midst of campaigns of persecution. And that's one thing that we will continue trying to do. So I don't know whether, Rashi, you could remind me whether I'm missing, and I could address any additional questions regarding.
Thank you, Anna. I think you addressed most of my questions, but I think, Jory, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah. Look, it's something that Joanna said that struck me, and it's something that I kept coming back to in the report and the research. And this is I just kind of a last thing I kind of want to say before we invite maybe Ahmed or Kristen or any others who might have something to say about this issue. 3 really quick things. One, like in a lot of places, it was certainly in Britain anyway, that in a sense, the most marginalized people, which happened in Britain, like more, people from some minority, Black, ethnic people came forward to offer their services in the first instance to help in frontline services. And this was the case in Kuwait. There were Bidoon, was kind of, stateless people who were working in reception centers and administering and admitting people into hospitals and so on. And as a result, before the sort of mask protocols and so on and social distancing became widespread, they paid quite a high price. And I think it's kind of overlooked in a lot of ways that there was a kind of predisposal to help the nation. That's the first thing. It's kind of unrelated to everything. The thing that really struck me about what Joanna was saying was the mental health point. And look, 49% of the people on the survey said that unemployment and economic hardship was difficult, was a real challenge. But 41 said that mental health absolutely took a battering. And I want to remind people, maybe Ahmed, who I hope will join us in a short while, maybe Ahmed will come back to this. 7 people, including very young people, have taken their lives as a result. It's going to make me start bawling if I think about it too much. 7 people have taken their lives as a result or in connection with their legal status as Bidoon not being able to have a life. This is the mental health impact of the legal status compounded with what happened during COVID is costing lives. It's as simple as that. And, so Joanna touched on it. I just wanted to mention that. The final thing, my third point and last point, and Amal was very good at ending on a positive point. I'm going to try to end on a positive point, maybe only to be slapped down by Ahmed, who I think we should invite to speak in a minute. I'd like to think that people in Parliament now, after the elections in last October, November, are more willing to engage with the suffering that they confront than previous parliaments. This is now a kind of broadly oppositional parliament and so on. The Human Rights Committee, it's not bad, I'd like to think. And maybe I know that there are some ideas and some at least draft discussion. I don't know if they've got to the level of discussion or to formal draft law yet. That provide a path, a pathway forward. Maybe there is some hope. Maybe that's something that Ahmed or others can add to. But I want to, Rasha, I know there's not many. We don't have a huge number of people taking part here. But if others want to jump in particular, Ahmed, if Tara wants to add anything, or yourself, well, I'd like to really invite you guys to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Jory. I think we definitely can open the floor for any comments or question. So please indicate either with raising hands and even like we're taking questions on YouTube. So those who are watching us live on YouTube or Twitter, and please get in touch if you have any question. But yeah, I will open the floor for any comments, especially on the points that raised by all panelists and colleagues.
Hi, can I say something?
Sure.
Thank you very much, everyone. And I think I have 3 points to talk about. One is the report itself, I think, is...
sorry, Ahmed, and sorry, Rashid. For other people who may not know you, Ahmed, I know you very well, but others may not. Would you mind just introducing yourself?
Yeah.
Sorry, Rashid. That's maybe
my name is Ahmed Jaber bin Suwaid. I'm from the Bidoon community originally, and I've been in the UK 4 years now. I'm a researcher at UCL, University College of London. Now resuming my PhD this year, and what I wanted to say is that regarding the report, I like the artistic component of it. I think is very useful. It adds not only as a visual but as a more expressive means of communication. This is one thing, and also the very documenting impact of the report, because this is what we lack. Actually, one of the problems that we face as Bidoon, stateless people in Kuwait, we lack the documentation in light of the denial of whatever happens to us. So there is a very big lack of documentation. So this is, I think, this is one of the contributions of this report to the situation of the Bidoon. Also, I think there is one thing, I think in a way that the report talks about it, but not very explicitly, which is how COVID-19 deepened the precarious situation of the Bidoon in terms of seeing firsthand how they are abandoned by the state. When everybody lost their job, everybody was forced to stay at home. Okay, you stay at home, but which home? That doesn't allow you to social distance. That doesn't have enough space for you. Doesn't have the the sanitizers, all the necessities that you need in order to survive. And many people, of course, got affected. Some people, contracted the virus. Some people have already lost their lives, so and so on. And then we come to the second point, which is the ID. I think while the ID in practice is part of, getting some things, some services, so-called services, but I think we need to be careful when we say that this is essential. The ID is essential or have been made essential deliberately. So there is a very important thing here, because the ID actually is is being used as a parts and parcel of the larger approach, larger governance of statelessness that is, I call, and one of my friends, were like co-authoring a paper, foreignization, forcing the Bidoon to become foreigners in their own land. If you don't mind, I have a PowerPoint that I arranged for something else, but I can share. But I can't. I think I'm disabled. I cannot share my screen unless you permit me. Okay, so it's just to, what I wanted to show is that the slide, little visual, the process of using this ID to make the Bidoon from originally Bedouin, indigenous of the country, into stateless, into illegal residents, and now they're trying to make the Bidoons as deportable aliens. This is what I wanted to say about the ID. So we need to be careful, I think, when we describe it as essential, because there is an understanding, especially here with the government, the British government. They think the Bidoons who have the ID are privileged Bidoons, and only those who don't have it are the ones who have a problem. Whereas this is I think problematic, way of looking at it. There is one question to end. What can be done? I think in terms of what can be done, I think we need to just think of two questions. One is the arbitrary, unlawful, unconstitutional practices of the Jihaz al-Markazi. The Jihaz al-Markazi in itself is unconstitutional. And if we look at how states name people, we can understand some attitudes by the state. A state that describes, people as illegal, this is not a neutral position. So this is again problematic, because it is making judgment without sending people to courts. Who can arbitrate? Who can adjudicate whether this person legal or illegal? There must be like a judicial, authority to decide that. The executive authority cannot decide that. So here there is a problem. There is in the naming of the Bidoon as illegal residents. The very establishment of al-Jihaz itself is unconstitutional, because it conflicts with many articles of Kuwait's constitution. So these two things, I think they need to be spotlighted.
Ahmed, sorry to interrupt. I think you can share your presentation if you like, if you're able to do so.
Okay, I will. Okay. So this is the presentation. It has a lot of components, but I'm not going through the whole thing. What I wanted to refer to is this is the process. Also, nationality in Kuwait legally by legal scholars, Kuwaiti legal experts and scholars, they call nationality markaz ghanuni, okay, like the legal position. So the Bidoon have been exposed to this process of changing their legal position from Sukkan al-Badiya, people of the desert of Kuwait, and then to Adimin Jinsiyya, Bidoon, 1965 to 1986. Then Muqimin Bisura Ghair Qanuniyya, starting 1987. Then from 19 93 until now, there are very systematic efforts to make the Bidoon not illegal residents, but foreigners of other states, you know. So this is what I wanted to show here. I wanted to show, you know, some of the problematics of the Jihaz al-Markazi, but I'm not going through this. I just wanted to show even the place where the Bidoon, if they needed, for example, treatment or even the vaccination, they needed to go to the Jihaz al-Markazi. Jihaz al-Markazi in itself is designed to exert symbolic violence on the Bidoon. When you go, you see the razor, you know, things, and it's as if you are going to Guantanamo to process your documentation. And I don't think I think these are very post-reflective, you know, things. They are deliberate. You know, there is something, especially one of the centers of Jihaz al-Markazi is famous in Kuwaiti culture until today as the historical place for executions. Qasr Naif is the place where executions in Kuwait used to take place. And until now, in the Kuwaiti culture and the Kuwaiti language, when you say to someone, I wish if you go to Qasr Naif, that means I wish you be hanged. You go and be hanged. So this is another way of exerting violence on the Bidoon. This in practice, if you want to know, I think, to have an idea of the Bidoon situation, using this ID is, I think, looking at this triangle, the Bidoons are left with only three options. Either they accept this process of foreignization, or forced migration, or suicide. There is no fourth option. I would like not to engage in any argument with the government, with the decision makers. Only ask them, do you have a fourth option for the Bidoon other than foreignization, forced migration, suicide? This is any other argument, I think, would be waste of time and gives more space for decision makers to escape and kill time and all these things. There is a lot of more to share maybe later on, but
Ahmed,
yeah.
sorry, just really quickly, if you don't mind, so what's your sense of where Parliament is at? Do you have any glimmer of hope that members of the current Parliament can do anything, can change anything, you know, really practically in terms of mental health, access to like anything?
Drury, I think, see, I am very skeptical of the very idea of state in itself. I don't think there is something called state anywhere in the world. I believe that we as human beings, we live in social networks. One is stronger than the other, and we are, the power is tilting, and this is. So if we can sometimes influence the people who are connected into the parliament, to the government in different ways, and then we can get things done. But I don't think they can wake up in the morning and say, oh, we have to hold the government responsible to respect the constitution, to the law. So they have to make justice for the Bidoon. This is only, I think, in utopia. I don't think, but I think what we need to do, we something like this, what we are doing now, is our space to exercise, our influence, I think.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Ahmed. That was very useful illustration of, like the stages of like the historical stages for Bidoon, but also the actually very stark image of and picture of the Jihaz al-Markazi, and what does that illustrate and represent. I will open your question. So if anyone can answer Ahmed's question, what is next?
I don't have an answer, but I do have a question. We're joined by Kristen Dewan in Washington. We don't often hear a take from the U.S. It's a very close ally. There are 3 bases of Kuwait of the U.S. forces in Kuwait. Obviously, the action led by the United States in 1991 was crucial in securing the independence and the return of the government. Kristen, I'd like to ask you, what is, having heard and your years of experience of this situation, what's your sense of where it's going?
Well, thank you, Duri, for inviting me here, and really, I'm just here to learn from all of you. I'm really grateful. I haven't read the report yet, but I'm looking forward to reading the report and just understanding more about the situation. I'll just say, somebody that's been working on Kuwait for a couple decades at least, that the intensity of the pressure put on the Bidoon is evident, even for somebody like me. I'm not really specialized on this issue or thinking about it, but it's very, very clear, and unfortunately evidenced by what Ahmed was saying. I mean, it can't but help but come to your attention when you're seeing the suicides by even children, or pretty much children. Bidoon, I've gotten media kind of questions, calls from people trying to understand the increased number of people seeking asylum abroad, which is something I'm very curious about. And actually, that'd be a question I have, is if we have evidence of this, of increased people going abroad. I think I had even heard a number, which was crazy to me, but might be true, that Kuwait had the highest number of people seeking asylum abroad in Europe of any of the Middle East states, which I found crazy given Kuwait's small number of people and the fact that most Kuwaitis have citizenship aren't going to be. I can't imagine that there are a lot that are doing that. So I thought this must be Bidoon. So I'll just say it's kind of evident and heartbreaking. And I think just from my slight research, I completely agree with Ahmed. You have to look at it historically and the strategy of the state right now and what they're approaching. From Washington, honestly, I don't know of any distinct policy. I know that when they do their human rights reports and the like that the issue is highlighted, so it's not completely neglected. I do feel, though, just as an outside researcher, that this is a topic of special sensitivity, which I guess all of you are speaking about. It's definitely there are kind of barriers put in place for scholars to look at this and to work on it, probably for self-evident reasons. And I kind of wonder if that's the same for governments that are pushing on this issue from outside. I bet they're not getting a lot of reception. But I think you're right to ask the question, because I imagine if any government could have that sort of at least relative pressure, it probably would be the United States. Just another issue to think about that I think about a lot is that we are in this period of greater nationalism. We're seeing all of the Gulf states really push back a lot on any kind of foreign intervention into their domestic affairs. That's very evident, which I think makes it a lot harder. And I think also is a more generally weakening of the rights-based discourse and the transnational kind of pressure that comes with that, as people are looking more to sort of, we're states, we're looking to our own people, and we're looking to our own sovereignty. I think it makes it a much more difficult environment to be working in. And from that point of view, I definitely commend all of you, because I know it's got to be a tough area to be working in right now.
Thank you, Christine. Jory, do you have any comments?
Well, it's just tough. I mean, I think Kristen's got a huge, their Gulf State Institute in Washington's got a huge you read it well. It's kind of not really there. You're right that in the U.S. and we cited it in the report. It's great. The U.S. State Department report about the othering that Ahmed talked about of the Bidoon is palpable. I mean, Ahmed himself, he told me about an experience he had, but I want to share with you guys just as we've got only like 8 minutes left. One of the people I consulted for this thing. So I guess you all know the process. The process is that you want to renew your ID document. You go into Jahaz al-Markazi, the central system or central apparatus or whatever you want to call it, and it's you fill in your name and the essential details. And then and I learned this from Ahmed initially, is that you have to pre-sign a kind of agreement, an affidavit of some sort that says, well, I agree, I've entered all this information correctly. What I'm going to get back is the authenticated, it's correct information. And then you go back later, a couple of days later, a week later, you collect your card and it says your origin is Iraqi rather than stateless. And then, and I think, as I say, I think Ahmed had his own experience with this. And I'll tell you one that I did speak to. And the person says to the person on the other side of the counter, well, hang on, I'm not Iraqi, I'm stateless. Why have I got a card back that says I'm Iraqi or Iranian or Saudi? I think Saudi is another big one. And then the person says to you, well, you signed the document last week. You said it was all correct. What's your problem? You've already pre-signed it. It is correct. And you go, well, no, it's not. There's a mistake. Well, it's actually not a mistake. And the most absurd one I got in the course of the research for this thing, he contacted me on Twitter, and he has a very well-known, popular kind of last name is Ashamadi. So it's a very well-known kind of tribal name. And it was like Yusuf Ashamadi. And he said he went through the same process. He went into Jahaz al-Markazi. He got it back, Faransawi. He's French. Like, what on earth are you talking? There's no possible way on earth that I'm French. It is just not conceivable. It's absurd. It's completely absurd. And then he said that the woman opposite, the official, said, "Do you want your kids to go to school? Do you want to be able to access healthcare or not? Get out of here. Go."
Yeah,
it's like it's insane. It's really it's coercive falsification. And some people will say you're on paper trying to get rid of this community, and some people will say that other states have tried that and it didn't work so well.
Yeah, I thank you, Jory. This is I think Tara, and we have Amal. So we'll start with Tara, maybe.
Thanks. I just had a comment about what Jory and Christine said about the international advocacy. And I think I can speak about it because the other country I cover gets a lot of international attention that is very closely tied to the geopolitical situation of Iran. And what we have been discussing over and over with different activist community from the Gulf in Washington is how to move the needle in a space that seems increasingly more difficult. For instance, in the context of President Biden's trip to the Middle East, we were just baffled by lack of any regard to the issue. And I tend to think, and this is just my thoughts, so I welcome other panelists and viewers' thoughts on that, that we're only stronger together, and we can only change course if we increase solidarity among movements, different population, cross-national, and cross these borders, and push back on the double standard and picking and choosing. And we see this as a human rights issue. We see human rights issue as global and non-discriminatory. But I think we are, as Christine was describing, we're in a state that there's a lot of picking and choosing of how and when to prioritize. So from that sense, this report is extremely important because it is looking at it from an intersectional and cross-sectional perspective. And I think it's important to connect the dots beyond national border, but also beyond the region. And only then we might be able to push back on some of the national security excuses that are always thrown at us when we try to raise these issues.
Thank you, Tara. We only got 3 minutes to finish, so last words from Amal.
Thank you, Rasha. And let me start by saying I completely agree with Tara. And I think building solidarity across borders and also across different community groups and doing it in a way which really centers those who have lived through the issue that we're trying to address is really important. I just wanted to maybe offer my 2 cents on the question of what next. And if you're looking at what next also through a kind of a state-centric perspective, then there are 2 entities that you're really talking about. You're talking about what next in terms of the state that is the violator of rights and that kind of holds the power to rectify the situation directly. And you're talking about what next in terms of the wider international community. And if you look at the state that is actively excluding communities from citizenship, from rights, etc., then what we've seen in various situations playing out around the world is that it can go in one of 3 ways. So you can have a situation where at some point it actually becomes politically expedient to be inclusive. And this could be due to external pressures, it could be due to a change in the demographics or whatever. And then you would have situations where states recognize communities and kind of grant them citizenship. You saw this happening in Sri Lanka with the hill country Tamil community. You've seen it happening in Central Asia, for example. Then you also have situations where the general state attitude towards a community is quite hostile, but you have a state actor that kind of goes against the grain and creates an opening for change. And this happened, for example, in Bangladesh with the Urdu-speaking community who have been subject to extensive discrimination, marginalization. But then there was a Supreme Court intervention which resulted in the court declaring that they are citizens of Bangladesh and need to be recognized as citizens. And that kind of created an opening. But then you had the third scenario where this doesn't happen and the state continues to kind of impose its exclusionary policies on communities. And in the worst case scenario, like with the Rohingya, this escalates into unspeakable crimes against humanity, genocide. It can really spiral into situations which really bring out the darkest of humanity. But even in other situations where it doesn't degenerate to that extent, you're left in a situation where the community really has very little hope for a structural resolution to their problem. And with the international community, I think Tara's spot on that really it boils down to geopolitics, and unfortunately there are very few international actors who are willing to stand on principle on issues. We saw this working on the Rohingya issue where so many international actors feigned surprise when the genocide happened. And there was nothing surprising about the genocide. It was there in plain sight for everyone to see that this was about to happen, but it served interest to turn a blind eye to the situation. And then when the atrocities were committed, in order to save face, different entities had to kind of claim ignorance. And so I think the solution when it comes to the international community is a little more complex. And I agree with Tara that it requires us to kind of broaden our bases and to push for a more principled approach on kind of diplomacy in a more consistent way. But that's easier said than done. So I'm kind of cautiously optimistic, if you will, in terms of what that could potentially lead to. Thank you.
Thank you, Amal. With this, I think we came to the end of our event. Thanks everyone, and like many fruitful thoughts. I hope the conversation and the actions continue. It's just a start, and I invite everyone to read the report. And thanks to everyone who has joined us today, and thanks for the great panelists for this wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rasha. Thanks for chairing, moderating, and everyone for taking part. Chris, thanks for coming along. Ahmed, Tara, good luck in Beirut. And thanks to the viewers online. Apparently there was like 160 of you, somewhat.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.